you guys? The Curious Owl here, and today I have my June 2024 wrap-up. So June was actually a pretty successful month for me. I didn't end up completing all of the Battle of the Bookish challenges that I wanted to, but I read a lot of really great books, and I read just a lot in general for me personally. I was not expecting to read as much as I did, and I managed to also get myself from going in between 6 books to then being between 2 books, which is a huge accomplishment for me, if I do say so myself. When it comes to July, we're going to be kind of going back up a tick and then hopefully coming back down a little bit. So we'll kind of see. But let's go ahead and get into the stats for the month. So in terms of page counts, I had a total of 3,194 pages. I am not counting any pages that were done today on June 30th because I have yet to finish a couple books and I'm not sure if I'm going to fully finish them, but we're going to say that we're somewhere in the 3,200 range essentially for the month of June, which is pretty good. As far as audiobook minutes, I had 14 hours, 21 minutes, and 9 seconds worth of audiobooks. I had 9 physical books, 3 ebooks, and 1 audiobook that I listened to over the course of the month. And 9 of the books I read were from my personal library, and 4 were borrowed from my library, either physical copies or the Libby app. Now, in terms of star ratings, I had 3 5 stars, 6 4 stars, and 4 3 stars. So overall, not too bad of a month. Ended up actually being pretty solid, if I do say so. It wasn't too bad. It was pretty good. Okay, so starting from the top, I had quite a few carries over from May. So the first one that I finished was Only on the Weekends by Dean Atta. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a young non-binary teen named Mac who essentially gets into a relationship with this guy that he has been fawning over for most of his childhood. This person, though, they are still closeted. They don't really want to come out as gay because of some of the ramifications that may involve it. But then when Mac's dad, who is a very well-known director, gets moved out to Scotland for a little while for a film, Mac goes with him, and essentially then he meets this trans character named Finn who is also very interested in Mac, and it's kind of this thing where Mac's only able to see their boyfriend on the weekends or doing things with Finn and their friends on the weekends. Basically, the weekends are like the main time where a lot of these stories and a lot of these things in the plot take place. This definitely, though, is more character heavy. This is also told in more of a verse format, similar to things like Elizabeth Acevedo or Ellen Hopkins, and very similar to Dean Atta's debut novel, which was The Black Flamingo, which I had rated 3 stars when I first read it. Only on the Weekends I liked a little bit more. I think that just the writing style was a little bit more in tune with what I like when it comes to verse writing, and I think that Dean Atta just found a lot more their stride when it came to this book. But I did feel like there were some things that were a little bit hit or miss for me. This does, though, go a lot into the idea of what exactly is emotional cheating as opposed to, you know, just physical cheating, which most of us are pretty familiar with. There's this aspect of emotional cheating that goes on that needs to be addressed when it comes to any kinds of relationships, especially if they are not explicitly stated that you are allowed to have more than one partner at a time kind of thing. So this is hitting a really interesting topic that I don't think gets really brought up a lot, especially in YA, and so I was really happy to see that that was kind of brought up because it's a topic that needs to be discussed. The next book I ended up completing was Baptism of Fire by Andrzej Sapkowski. This was our May read for the Witcher read-along. We are going to be having the live show for this on July 6th along with the June read because I was not able to do the live show for Baptism of Fire in June, but I did rate this a 3 out of 5 stars. Not too bad, but definitely a little bit less bombastic and fun as I felt like the rest of the books have been so far. Just wasn't exactly hitting the same, and that's a theme that kind of carries on into the next book in this series for me personally, but more of my thoughts of this are going to be in the live show on July 6th. Then I read an anticipated read for this year, which was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I fell in love with this I really think Ali Hazelwood is going to be an auto by author for me, because not only do I have all of her books to date, but I just love her writing style ever since I read The Love Hypothesis. But this one didn't hit as much for me, and I think that this was because I felt like the relationship between the main characters was not really 100% to my liking. I liked the idea of this marriage of convenience kind of thing, but I didn't really feel the chemistry between the two characters. But I did really appreciate the whole story as an entirety, and I loved the world building that was involved in this, and I would be interested in seeing more from this world if we can get it, but I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely so far my least favorite of the 2 Ali Hazelwood books I've read, but I have yet to read more to really kind of get a good idea of how highly rated of an author she is for me. But I do think that at the very least her writing style is something I am going to thoroughly enjoy no matter what book she puts out, so she will very likely be an auto by author for me. Next, we had my first 5-star read of the month, which was First Line Wins by Ashley Elston. This was a book club read for my mom and my sister with the book club that was back home, which has kind of dissolved into a lot of nothingness at this point. But my sister is currently reading this, and my mom is currently reading it, but I finished it first. This is what I love about mystery thrillers. I love thrillers and mystery stories where I get whiplash. And whiplash in the sense that, like, I am having to reread certain parts again to make sure that I read something correctly, because it's so shocking to me that I cannot have read it the correct way the first time. This was twist after twist after twist, even from the very first chapter. And I just loved this. I ate this up every single time I got a chance to read it. It was so well done, and I would love to see anything else Ashley Elston ends up putting out in terms of either mystery thrillers or anything else that she puts out. I'd be willing to give a chance, because I do believe this is their debut novel, and what a debut novel for sure. Like, absolutely amazing, heart-pounding, definitely very odd and weird and like just thrilling, truthfully, which I love about thrillers. So 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely love this. We'll definitely be looking into more of Ashley Elston's work in the future. Next, I ended up tackling a behemoth of a novel that I struggled with for probably a good couple months with getting through, but I did really enjoy it a lot, and that was Sons of Darkness by Gaurav Mohatni. This is an epic fantasy that is inspired by the Mahabharata, which is a Hindu story involving things like the Pandava brothers and this idea of Krishna, who is kind of in some ways like the Hindu version of Jesus Christ in a lot of ways. He's at least revered in that way, similar to how in Christianity Jesus is revered. So essentially, though, this story is loosely based on the Mahabharata, like I said, but it's a fantasy version of it where we see multiple different characters in this world basically coming into their own power, or essentially scheming to get to have power kind of thing. There's Krishna, who is currently what's called the usurper. He's like the usurper of the throne, and he is trying to maintain his rule, but that's becoming really difficult when there's this impending war that's going on. Then you have Shakuni, who is this character that is older, very old, is now a torturer. And then you have several other characters that play into different aspects of this world. And at first it seems very disjointed over the course of the story. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces that don't seem to really fit together very well. And that's probably for the first half of the book. And then you get to the second half and you start to see the pieces really start to come together, because a lot of the book is leading up to what is called a Swayamvar, which I think I'm pronouncing that right, but basically it's this big marriage ceremony where people can essentially fight to or get in a competition to win the hand of a princess. And that is what a lot of this book is leading up to, because this marriage will be basically the turning point for this kingdom, based on who the princess marries and who comes into power because of that. So there's a lot of moving pieces within this, and there's this backdrop of this impending war that is threatening to come about. And it is very much something where if you are a political fantasy person, if you love your political fantasies like Game of Thrones, it is going to be a book for you. If you are not super into political fantasies, this is not a book for you, because it is very heavy on the politics. And I like my books with politics in them, do not get me wrong, but this one had a lot of stuff that seemed to kind of go over my head, and it was just very much a time-consuming kind of thing that it made it hard for me to get through the story. But I did really like it when I got especially to the Swayamvar and seeing the battle scenes and seeing all these things happen. But the lead up to it was so long to me and so dense in the politics of the world that it didn't feel as enthralling as I wanted it to be. But I still do really like this book and highly recommend it if you are a fan of like Game of Thrones, for instance, because it has all the same vibes. It's heavily inspired, actually, per the author, by George R. R. Martin. And I just think that it is a really well done story, especially for a fantasy debut or a debut in general. I think Gaurav Mahatni has a lot of brilliant talent, and I am excited to see the next book in this series when it comes out. Next, I ended up reading a book that started off my unread book project TBR because I finally managed to get through a lot of my current reads that I was in the middle of and was able to start my unread book project that you can see videos on TikTok for. And the first book I ended up having for that was called The Human Hunter by Loki Reynard. This is a sci-fi thriller romance, basically. It involves a character who is being hunted by this alien. Basically, we live on, like, I think a whole other planet, and there's these aliens who are basically like bounty hunters, and they have this relationship with humans, and essentially, like, our main character finds out that she is being hunted because there's a bounty on her head. She doesn't understand why, but the hunter essentially knows who she is, why she's being hunted, and it's basically a story of her having to go through this amnesia-like state and start trying to remember the things that happened to her that have now caused her to be essentially hunted down. And the reason it's more of a romance is that you learn as the story goes on that these two kind of have like a little bit of chemistry and possibly a past relationship. This was fine. It wasn't like the most fantastic thing in the world, but it wasn't boring by any means. I think it was really interesting, and I would be interested to read more from this world. I think it was actually just really short and too short for my liking. I would have liked for it to have been a little bit longer because I think especially a lot of the things that happened to help with the reasoning of things that happened to our main character were really condensed and short, and I would have liked for that to have been drawn out a little bit more to help with like fleshing out the whole story a little bit more. But overall, it wasn't too bad. I gave it a 3-star. It was, you know, it was the time. It got me through. I didn't hate it. Just wasn't absolutely my favorite romance of all time. Next, though, I had my next though was a absolute favorite of mine that I fell in love with, and that was Some Girls Do by Jennifer Dugan. Again, Jennifer Dugan is probably going to be an auto-buy author for me because I have loved both Verona Comics and Some Girls Do so much. I love her writing style. I love how she makes me so connected to these characters. She's just absolutely wonderful and can do no wrong in my eyes. This follows two girls in high school. One is a very impoverished beauty queen, and the other is a up-and-coming track star who was kicked out of her old school for being gay, and she is working on suing that school in order to stand up for those that are gay and that are closeted to make more of a safe space for them. These two collide in a very unlikely circumstance, and essentially it is the story of them kind of getting to know each other, and one of the characters is more closeted and kind of starts to realize that she may have feelings for girls, but is kind of afraid to say anything about it. This one heavily talks about this idea of forcing others to come out when they're not ready. So in the LGBTQ community, we essentially have this thing where we want everyone to feel like they're able to come out, right? We want everyone to not feel like they need to be in the closet. But unfortunately, for some people, based on certain circumstances, coming out is not necessarily an option until they can get to a place where they are 100% safe. There's going to be no ramifications for them, or very little ramifications, if any. And this book really talks about how hard it is to be someone not only who is closeted trying to come out, but afraid to because of the ramifications that could happen in the circumstances that they're in, but also from the side of someone in a relationship with a closeted individual who is prominently out, that it's hard to have that kind of a relationship because you want more from it, and you want that person to be comfortable enough in their own skin to have a more public relationship, things like that. But how it's a very fine line between being pushy and being supportive of letting someone come out in their own time kind of thing. There's a very fine line that is kind of discussed in this book that is teetered on back and forth, and it's a lot of great discussions, especially someone that is on the LGBTQ spectrum who may not have really understood that this is a problem that can happen, or, you know, this idea of either forcing people to come out or accidentally outing somebody. It's a very messy thing to be involved in, and so it's really important that we have novels like this that help to explain these situations and explain how it's not okay to out somebody when they're not ready, or it's not okay to force someone to come out when they're not ready, because if anything, that's going to push them further back away from you in the closet, you know, what have you. I absolutely love this book. Anything Jennifer Dugan, in my eyes, again, can be no wrong. I adore this woman with all my heart and soul, and I cannot wait to read more of her work. 5 out of 5 stars. Chef's kiss. Amazing. Next, we had The Tower of the Swallows, which was the Witcher book for the month of June. Again, we'll be doing the live show for this and Baptism of Fire July 6th, but this one was a 3-star for me. Again, similar feelings to what I had with Baptism of Fire. Wasn't as fun. This is definitely, so far, the lengthiest book in the series, but we still have yet to get to the last 2 books, which I do believe are quite chunky as well. But yeah, this one was okay. It just felt like it took a long time for anything to really happen. It was definitely very slow, and so this one was not a favorite for me because I just felt like it took forever for us to get somewhere in any kind of capacity. So it was fine, but we'll hear more of my thoughts on this in the live show. Next, I read Brandy's membership book club book for the month of June, which was The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. Now, I know a lot of people really love this series, but I was a little lukewarm. I listened mainly to the audiobook of this, and I do think that that may have been a massive factor in my rating of this, because I think if I had read it more physically, I probably would have enjoyed this a lot more. But this is centered around a world where there are these things called bone shards, and shards are basically found, I think, behind the ear of most people, and they are essentially like a link to these people where they have a certain amount of power, and you can in some ways control other people with these shards. And you have the Bone Shard Daughter, who is like the daughter of the king, who is trying to not only cement her place in the hierarchy and in the kingdom so that she can rule and take over, but there's some things going on behind the scenes that she's starting to recognize are not right. And then you have another character who kind of is like, the best way I can describe him is at one point he felt like a swashbuckling pirate. But I don't think I really got as much out of this story as I wanted to. I didn't quite follow it as I had wanted to. And so I completely lost track of how this guy was in all capacity. But it was okay. I think, like I said, if I had read it physically, I would have gotten more out of it than I did with listening to it audibly. We had my second pick for the Unread Book Project, which was Under Falling Skies by Kate McLeod. This is a more YA sci-fi mystery thriller. Like, this is basically a whodunit in the future. And it's a locked-in whodunit. So, like, they're locked in a place and somebody is killing off the rest of them. Like, and then there were none vibes. Massively, and then there were none vibes. Except that there's no one that essentially sends people to an island. This is very much like they end up in this cave to protect themselves from this natural disaster that's happening, and they all get locked in there, and then all of a sudden somebody starts killing off the rest of them. I really like this a lot. I think that the writing was not my favorite in terms of the style, but I really enjoyed this story from beginning to end. It, especially once people started dying left, right, and center, I was super invested, and I just fell in love with the character of Scout, who is our main character. She's a 16-year-old girl who lost her entire family in this war that happened 10 years prior. And she very much is looking for a way to make a name for herself, but also find out why exactly her family was killed, because there was a lot of suspicion surrounding around what happened when her parents died that she's trying to find out. And this is apparently like a part of a series. This is the first book in a series by this author, and I would be heavily interested in the next book at the very least, because I really like this a lot. Like I said, writing style not my favorite, but I definitely enjoyed it to where it was a 4 out of 5 stars for me. And my next read ended up being my last carryover from the last several months, and that was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I will say this would have been a 5-star if the beginning didn't feel so slow. The very beginning of the story felt super slow to me, and so that is the only reason it did not get a 5-star, because once I got past the piece where it was super slow and I started, you know, seeing Addie end up with Henry and talking with him and all these things, I was sold. And I loved this book from that point on. This book made me cry, it made me laugh, it made me heartsick, it made me nostalgic. It just hit every single thing that I was looking for when I had heard people talking about this book. And it hit almost all of my expectations, which, like I said, you know, having been the beginning, being super slow, you know, that's the only gripe I had with it. But this is something I would read and reread and reread and reread until the end of time. This is definitely going to be in that list of possible rereads for me, with like The Hating Game and, you know, other books like that. But 4 out of 5 stars, absolutely love this. Definitely see where everyone is coming from with this book, with why they love it so much. And I'm now a little conflicted on my feelings for V.E. Schwab, because I loved this, I loved Gallant. I did not like the Darker Shade of Magic series, and I have yet to read the Vicious and Vengeful, I think, trilogy or duology, and I did not like the Monsters of Verity duology. So I'm kind of like iffy with V.E. Schwab. I think in the future what I'm going to do is I'm going to request the books from the library, or get the books from the library that she writes, and see whether I like them before I decide to purchase like actual copies of her books in the future, because that makes more sense to me, since I don't know whether or not I would consider her an auto-buy author for me. The next book I ended up reading was my next book for the Unread Book Project. This was for Defending Freedom by T.S. Anke. This is the first book in a male-male military romance, romantic suspense kind of series. This one follows 2 main characters. Our first one is Mac, who is a former Navy SEAL, and he and a couple of his Navy SEAL buddies, basically after being you know, on leave and everything, they created what was called the Guardian Alliance, which this is a group where they essentially have this complex where it's a bunch of like training grounds and obstacle courses and things like that for like corporate things, like if they're doing team building activities, or for self-defense classes, things like that. Unfortunately for Mac, a couple of his former Navy SEAL friends have committed suicide. So there is mentions of suicide. There is a lot of mention of, you know, veteran mental health that is looked at. This is a novel that is very much centered around the need for better mental health support for our veterans, which is a very, very important topic in today's society, especially during wartime, and when we have people that come back from war with things like severe PTSD or anxiety or depression, or a combination of the different mental illnesses. And then there's another character whose name is Freedom, who is a podcaster who is looking into the suicides of these Navy SEALs, and you find out that it's also because his brother Justice was someone who committed suicide, but it was very mysterious, and the whole mystery surrounding around the suicides seems to be something deeper than what people are thinking. And so Freedom is trying to really delve into Mac's friend's suicides and understand what's going on. And when they meet, it's definitely like, you know, a more so not hate at first sight, but ambivalent at first sight kind of thing, where like Mac does not really want to talk to Freedom. He thinks that he's another vulture, and Freedom is like, I'm not going without some kind of an answer. So they kind of like build this kind of friendship and then budding relationship. I feel like everything was super rushed. This was a book that was under 150 pages, and it definitely felt like it. It was way too fast-paced for me in terms of the relationship. I just felt like I wanted more suspense, and I felt like I only really got that towards the very end, and it was very rushed, but it was fine. Like, I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a fast read. I would be considering looking into the other books in the series, because I did at least like the writing style that was going on with this, so I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. Not too bad, but again, not my favorite. But the last book I finished, because I have a couple books I'm working on right now that I don't know if I'm going to finish before the end of the month, but my last book I finished was a 5-star, and that was Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. This is, if you take the Golden Girls, age them back about 10 years from when the show starts, and make them international spies. What else could you ask for with this? This was fun, fast-paced, enticing, hilarious. Like, the quips and everything involved in this story were just perfect. This entire book is chef's kiss, absolutely amazing. You need to read it. Like, this is going to be one of my favorites of the year, I think, because of how much I just want to scream about this book from the rooftops. It is amazing. Go get it from your library or go buy it if you can and read it. Read the damn book. But without further ado, those are all of the books I ended up reading in the course of June. Quite a few. I was actually really surprised with my progress, especially with the fact that I got through 3 books for my unread book project in 1 month. And almost basically in about a week and a half too, which was really surprising. But thankfully they were all fairly short books, so that helped me out quite a ton. But thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books that I mentioned and what you thought about them, if you have any thoughts on them. Otherwise, just leave me a nice little cute emoji, like a little purple heart or something like that, to let me know that you were here if you don't really have anything to say. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be, I would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owl in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!